So this week I'd like to share with you 10 principles of warehouse design and operations. Proven principles that are going to help you be much more efficient in your warehousing. But I'm not a warehouse expert, so what I've managed to do is to film one of our warehouse experts at a recent seminar. Let's get over and have a look.
So we're talking about warehousing, and indeed, as Rob says, I'm sort of specialist in warehousing. I don't think I necessarily set out to do that, but over the time that I've been with Logistics Bureau, I've just done more and more and more, and I've really, during that time, appreciated that distribution center design, operation, flow, management, everything, there's a real science behind it. And so I've really delved deeper into that and found it absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to be sharing with you today some aspects of what I've found over the time that I've been with Logistics Bureau. Okay, so we have a number of things that we're going to talk about. 10 principles for best warehouse design and operation. The first one, and very important, when we're thinking about the current operation and indeed a new distribution centre, it's important that we look at minimal touches of the goods. And this is aligned to sort of lean management principles, okay? So we want to get close to zero handling of the products as we're taking them through the warehouse. In automated warehouses, you can get down to zero. But most warehouses are probably around about 7 or 8 handling, 7 or 8 times that people actually pick something up and put it down, including on a fork truck and so forth. As a general rule of thumb, if yours is around 3 or 4, that's not too bad. Okay, if you're an automated warehouse, you can get to 0, but if 3 to 4, if you're not automated, you're going okay. So there's a couple of tips for you. Okay, the next thing, which is really important, one-way flow. And also we've got to watch not only one-way flow during the warehouse, but also vehicles around a warehouse. So why is one-way flow important? It's a really good principle to apply during the design process, because that way you can plan your picking path through the warehouse, your sort of replenishment paths and so on. It's not always achievable. That's why I say it's a general principle. But if I start working on a warehouse design, I'll be thinking the first one, minimal touches of the good, and second, one-way flow. And that really helps us develop how a warehouse should run. In terms of vehicles, in Australia, we run trucks generally in a clockwise direction around the warehouse. And would anyone have any idea why that would be? Sorry? Ah, beautiful. Yes, so that the driver can reverse on the right side if they have to back into a dock, okay? But in the USA, it's the other way around, isn't it? It's counterclockwise. So never employ an American logistics expert to design your warehouse. So, but yeah, very important principles. The next thing, I'm going to shoot through these fairly quickly because we've only got 20 minutes or so. We have to make sure that stock is in the right place. And for this, we look at a process of product slotting. And I'll be having a look at that in a moment. But I might introduce you to a concept. The concept of triadic warehouse. The triadic warehouse. There's 2 types of warehouse. A triadic and a non-triadic. I told you there's a little bit of science here, okay? I don't want to dazz you with science. But a triadic warehouse is basically broken up into zones. Very simple. Fast-moving product, medium-moving product, and slow product. And a warehouse that's organised that way, we call triadic. Okay? A warehouse that has no zones would be non-triadic. Now, the interesting thing is about that is that we may have both triadic and non-triadic in the same warehouse. Because with these days, we're getting to see lots more automation. And if you have an automated part of your warehouse, the system that's operating that, you don't need to know where the stock is. But the crane or the automatic storage and retrieval system, it does. And it will go and get the stock. So there could be part of your warehouse where that applies, but the other part that's operated manually, we should be doing that. So correct placement of stock is critical. Okay. And the right amount of stock. This is about inventory control. It's about You know, and Rob's just been talking about benchmarks and so forth, but it's about having the right amount of stock for the demand that's happening through your warehouse. Now, sometimes customers make the mistake of measuring the stock by the sales value, but as logisticians, we know better. We have to look at the movement of that product because that drives the physical processes in the warehouse. So just be careful of that. Because sometimes people say, oh, we don't need to worry about that. It's a very low cost to our very low sales revenue. But if we have a big logistics process behind picking that stock, we do need to worry about it. So it's important to look at sales, but also the volume of the goods that are actually moving as well. Does that make sense? Okay. And I'll come back to that one in a minute. Efficient labour. This is critical, and I've got a little model which I'll show you in a minute as well. What I will say about labour is, as Rob said before, we have to optimise the labour that we've got, and we do that by looking at the hours that we're putting into the distribution centre and measuring what the output is. So I'm going to show you a measure of output efficiency in a few moments. Benchmarking, Rob's mentioned that one as well, and I've got another slide which I'll show you in a couple of minutes. Okay, this one. Selecting the materials handling system, and I've done a little drawing on the board. I haven't got too much time, so I'm just going to show you this 2x2 matrix. We're consultants, so we like these matrices. Okay, this is, you can see the two squares by 2 squares. On this axis, we have volume, low to high, and on this axis, we have the number of SKUs, or the stock keeping units that we're keeping in the organisation. And that's also from low to high. Now, in this day and age, we're seeing lots of what we call SKU proliferation. Companies are increasing the range of products that you're holding. And it's a real battle because every time you increase the number of SKUs that you've got much more multiple logistics operations that are happening in the warehouse. So there's a relationship between that. And at the same time, as volume increases, we have to deal with that. Okay, long story short, if you've got a low number of SKUs and low volume, you're going to have a very simple materials handling system, aren't you? It's going to be very basic. You might just have some racking and a fork truck. Yeah, that's it. But as the volume increases, you may start to introduce a medium level of mechanisation. And as your SKUs increase, you may start to look at a low level of mechanisation, even if your volume is still the same. Sometimes companies, their volume stays the same, but the SKUs increase. And that's where you have to consider how to handle that. You know, in the old days, we do a lot of work with breweries and so forth. You go into a pub and you would have 5 beers on tap in a pub. I'm talking about like 15 years ago. But now when you go into a pub, how many are there? Probably 25. And there's probably about another 50 brands in the cabinet behind the bar. So that's a very good example of SKU proliferation, but the volumes haven't increased that much in beer drinking. In fact, more people are drinking wines and spirits than perhaps what they have in the past. Okay, let's go to this one. When we have very high volume and a high number of SKUs, then we may look at a high mechanised system. And what you find is that, over time, you might be moving this way, or you might be moving that way, or you could be doing that. Well, how do you know? How do you know where you are? What we have to do is do some analysis to work out where you are, and then we choose the materials handling system to suit. Okay? So that's how you start to justify what type of materials handling system that you would use in your distribution centres. Okay, and I've just touched on this. We need to know our data. And this is where we look at all of the transactional value data and information that's coming in, what we're receiving, what we're picking and packing and dispatching, what we're receiving in terms of returns, are there value-adding activities. I'm going to give you a tip. I'm going to tell you a secret. Never design your warehouse on averages. Okay? If you do, I will find you. But you apply some statistics. Because if you design for averages, guess what? You're going to be right half the time, but wrong the other half. So we really got to look at those peaks and the troughs, and that's where statistics come in. So we use some mathematics there to work that through so that we get things right. Okay? So never design on averages. Hope you noted that down. And warehouse management software. Rob mentioned this, but it's very important that you have a management system, particularly as the complexity rises in an operation. You need a warehouse management system to help with the daily tasks that a distribution centre has to operate. You can spend a lot of money on a warehouse management system, but there are also some quite well-priced systems that are not overly expensive. And these days, those systems support all types of radio frequency picking and also what they call voice picking, which is where the picker wears a headset like this, hands-free, and they can pick and pack the stock as they're working. So some of those technologies are really valuable. This one is critically important if we're into a warehousing development project or just improving our current operations. We have to consult widely. Long gone are the days where you just have 2 or 3 people sitting in a room. You know, when I'm working with a company, I'll go and talk to the fork truck driver, the receptionist, the managing director, the suppliers even, and just to find out what's going on and what are the requirements for that particular warehouse. People unloading containers at a dock, because often they'll tell you about the dynamics that they have to deal with on a day-to-day and an hour-to-hour basis. And then we would also need to consult with architects and engineers and environmental people and so on. So it's important to consult widely so that we've got all of those inputs. And sometimes we may receive an input from somebody and it may not be quite fitting into what we want, and that's okay. We'll just forget what they've said. We've taken it on board, we've heard it, but we may not do exactly what they've said. But at least everyone gets to have a bit of a say. So that's really important. So we consult widely during the process. Okay, now I'm just going to give you a couple of tips on design. There's 3 methods of laying out a warehouse. This one is the U-shaped design where you're receiving and you're dispatching out this way. This is a triadic warehouse. See how it's zoned? Okay, fast, medium, slow. Beautiful. The benefit of that design is that it has the docks at one end of the building and is the most economical from a land use perspective. Okay? But then there's this one, which is an I-shaped design. This one is receiving at one end, obviously over there, and dispatch over here. This uses up more land because you have to have hard stand at one end and hard stand at the other. But what it is good for is high volume flow, because you can get a lot of volume coming through here, and you're separating the receiving and the dispatch functions. Then there's this one, which is an L-shaped design. This is where you have receiving in, and really good for cross-stocking, where we're bringing stock in and then we're sending it out fairly soon after. We may never even put it into the racking. We're bringing it in and we're dispatching it. So it's an L-shaped design. Now, the interesting thing is that in some cases, we may have 2 of those designs in the one house, or even in the one warehouse, or even 3. And I've done that, particularly in Asia. And that might be the case where you're dealing with bulk goods coming into a warehouse, going out to a bulk customer. If you have a wholesale network, you're bringing stock in at one end, you need to cross-dock it and send it out to a whole bunch of stores. And if it's a retail network, you'll be bringing it in, putting it away, and then picking and packing it, and then to distribute it into small vans that are going around the city making deliveries. So we might actually employ all 3 of those in the one warehouse. So, but it's good to know that, because the design and the requirement will work out what type of shape the warehouse will be in terms of that. Rob mentioned I've just been to Qatar working on a project, retail chain over there. They've done all of these layouts, and I looked at them and they just didn't stack up. And they said to me, which is the best one? And I drew that and a combination of a flow-through on the board, one warehouse with a shop, and they said, got it. So the architect's scrambling off doing some preparatory drawings. And I'd only been there for, 5 days. But sometimes if you use an architect, they may not necessarily understand all of those dynamics and requirements of logistics. So that's where we're quite often called in to sort of give some preparatory work along the way so that the architects can do their job. Okay, I mentioned a few minutes ago slotting. This is a very important part of your process. If you correctly slot product into those zones and you have a triadic warehouse, then you can potentially achieve 20 to 30% saving in operating labour. So if you have product in the wrong slot, then you might find that you have long travel distances, your inventory control is not there, you're not rotating your stock. So it's really important to slot the product correctly at the start, according to the volume and the movement that's going through the warehouse. But then once you've done that, to revisit it maybe once or twice a year is our recommendation. And there's some really good software that is available to do that. And you just feed in the transactions, and the software, can relay out the warehouse, and you just then, once you know what the relayout is, you just spend some time moving stock around, and you can save maybe 20 or 30% in labour cost. Okay, efficient labour. I call it the overtime bug. Many companies suffer from this. So why do people work overtime? Because they can. A few extra bucks. I've got 5 minutes, thank you. A few extra bucks in their pocket. But if it's your warehouse and your staff are working overtime and you're paying it, that's not good, is it? So what we try to do is, just work out how efficient is our labour. And what we need to do is look at our normal hours worked versus overtime. We look at the lines picked per day and the number of cartons, eaches or pallets picked per period. And I often suggest that we use this formula here, which is order lines picked per labour hour. So if you want to know what you're doing, just look at the order lines picked per labour hour per day or per week or per month if you like. But compare that from period to period. Because if your order lines picked per hour is low, but you're working a lot of overtime, you need to say, what's going on? What are they doing? No one's working during the day. They all work after 5 o'clock. Okay, so just be aware of that. It's quite a useful measure. Some companies even tie incentives to that. So when employees aren't getting overtime, it means they're not getting enough money. So maybe you sometimes just have to adjust their enterprise agreement and put an incentive in so that when they do their work in the number of hours, they get a little bonus at the end of the week. Yeah. So anyway, something to think about. And as I said before, you can save up to about 32% of your labour costs by doing that. Okay, so the other thing is the warehouse management software. We've already mentioned that. There's lots of aspects to that in terms of design, the inventory tracking, the receiving, shipping. There's all of these modules that you are available in those, and if you get those working correctly, then a warehouse management system is an invaluable piece of software for your company. Product benchmark metrics. What we do, I think in Stephen's session you may have covered some of this, but we look at what is in parity with the market. We have maybe 5 or 6 factors that I would normally recommend that you look at in warehousing. Dispatch lines picked per hour, which you just mentioned. Lines picked per direct hours, lines per total DC hours, total DC hours per million in terms of DC costs, and DC costs per total labour used. And we can develop a factor there. So it's useful to have those so that you can gauge how you're performing. And I could probably give you another 6 or 7 more. I don't recommend that companies have any more than 6, actually. Sometimes, there's only 5 there. That's about right. Stuff that will help you manage your warehouse to being more efficient. So it's really important that if you don't have any benchmarks, that you do put them in place. And with these, if you've got multiple facilities, then you can actually compare the efficiency of each facility as well. So that's really helpful. Okay, finally, just in terms of perfect warehouse design, there's a number of factors here, and I just want to share those with you, and I think we'll end. We have 3 aspects to it. We have the layout, which I've already given you some insight into, the process, and the technology. In the layout, we're looking at the storage volume and the throughput. Critical things. So we need to get that right from the start. Or if it's an existing warehouse, sometimes we need to go back and check it because of that skew proliferation thing and the volume increases and so on. Then there's the process. You know, it's inbound and it's outbound. A warehouse is just a box. It's a box to be a buffer between supply and demand. That's all it is. But we need to manage the inbound stocks and the outbound stocks effectively so that we get that happening efficiently. And then there's the technology. What is the storage media? What level of automation do we need to put in? And we need to get that right. If we're able to balance all of those, then we have every opportunity of actually getting the perfect warehouse design. And then it's a matter of optimizing that from there on. Okay, that's my 20 minutes. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Rob.
So thank you, Mal Walker, for sharing your tips. Maybe we'll have to give you more than 20 minutes next time. Now, do remember, if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on this channel, do comment below. Any tips that you found in warehousing, add those in. That's going to help people who are watching. If you liked it, of course, hit the like button. It's really good to know which topics people like or don't like, so please do that. And lastly, subscribe. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, there should be a little red button just down there. Hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified of all of our videos that come out every week on a Wednesday. So thanks for your time. Thank you for watching. Hope you got some great tips from Mal.